Good afternoon, everybody. So I'm feeling a lot better today. Again, it's always getting ahead of those negative thoughts, or those ants, as we call them, those many times unconscious, thoughts and processes. However, those thoughts and processes are dictated through science, specifically through, biology, neurology, physiology, psychology, to go on and on. Anyway, those who know me know that I love to share my professional experience by utilizing also my prior personal experiences. So I like to hopefully share my story with hopes that it can inspire, motivate, maybe help others. I'm always here to reach out to if you have any questions, or you want to talk or anything, or you want to share anything with me as well. So for those of you who don't know me, I've been in the mental health field for about 15 years now, specifically trauma-related services. That's my specialization for about 15 years now, so tons of experiences in that professional development at several different hospitals, correctional facilities, juvenile placements, group homes, community college, facilitating groups. So a lot of different avenues there, but definitely, again, it's not been an easy road. So for those of you, I know I've shared some in the past. Again, I'm going to share some more of my own personal story. Some of it, may trigger things in you or whatever. So always remember, there's the crisis hotline or 911 to seek out help, or always reach out to me if you just need somebody to talk to. Anyway, my journey hasn't always been easy. I have a lot of abuse, score really high in the ACEs, everything like that as a child. Had 4 siblings. My parents were both came from poverty, so a lot of distant parenting and neglect, more due to my parents being, trying to provide a better life and being absent due to working a lot and things like that, right? So as a young child, I was repeatedly abused sexually by a babysitter. So that's one part of the trauma that I've had to work through. And then later on in life, which actually, I didn't realize till about my mid-20s when a family member started coming around more towards our family and stuff. And then it started triggering, nightmares and then daymares. And at first I really wasn't even sure if what I was remembering was real or not, right? So it was really challenging, a very, very challenging time. Luckily, I had an awesome mom who was there for me and, listened to me. At about mid-20s, I remember this specific family member and the abuse that happened throughout many years of my childhood as well. So that's more repeated trauma. And again, I'm not sharing this to get anybody, because I look at myself as definitely a thriver. And that's why I hope to share my story with hopes that other people will seek out this journey a lot earlier than I did to overcome this stuff. So here we are, some more trauma, right? Obviously, anybody who works in victim services know that typically victims tend to be re-victimized several more times throughout their lifetime. So probably making, I know I was, as a young teenager and as a young woman, I was making a lot of bad choices and things like that. I really, again, didn't even realize a lot of that trauma that had occurred, because again, my mind totally blocked it until around my mid-25s. And back then, the babysitter, families and things like that, they really didn't know how to reach out for support. My parents were on welfare, and things like that. So anyway, so here we are, probably in my lower 30s. And then a good friend of mine reaches out and tells me about an incident in my upper teenage years where I was around, a lot of people and friends that I should have been able to trust, and that should have had my back, and was given a date rape drug. Don't even know what all occurred there. Again, I found out about this. It happened at around age 17, or I think around 18. But I had no recollection of it until, again, in my 30s. This is all the stuff I've kind of had to work through and all of that. So anyway, to kind of give you all a little bit of a background, because, again, I've spent 15 years really, really delving deep within myself to really understand all this stuff. It's a really hard pill to swallow when you find out that you're around friends and things like that who are supposed to protect you from something like this happening, and then to find out you don't even remember or know anything. And kind of like the worst part is that you really don't even know what happened. Again, I'm a victim specialist now. So, I help a lot of victims through several different hospitals by providing crisis services in this field. So, I do think my perspective helps me kind of understand them, again, because I've spent 15 years working through this stuff, right? So anyway, so a lot of that led to a lot of negative life choices, a lot of shame, pity, all that stuff, negative thoughts and all that most people tend to want to avoid, right? Well, luckily, I was inspired, again, to go back to school at like age 33 or something. I was like, I've got to understand why all this happened to me. How did my brain block out this stuff? How did my prior choices affect who I was becoming and who I will become, right? So luckily, again, went to school for my bachelor's, sought out, had great mentors and teachers, and they're still friends and mentors today. Met some incredible people through them. Thank you, everybody. I'm very grateful for all of you who's crossed my path, and including bosses and things like that, and old bosses. Again, so here we are, and I wanted to understand, more about myself, and I wanted to get from a place where, I felt like most of my life I did live in survival mode, and I wanted to get into a place where, I was thriving, so I started learning about the Maslow hierarchy and things like that, and reading and learning about being self-actualized and all of that, and it's so unique because you can spend years looking for it, and it's just one of those things that you don't really find when you're seeking for it. They just kind of, you randomly through work internally, and you come across these incidences, and in one sense they're so profound that like you're like, oh my god. So that's like that aha moment. But at the same regard, it also takes you back down to, hey, it's kind of like, I know, I understand, and I know now, but in the same regard, I also know nothing. It's just like the weirdest thing. Anyway, so back on point. So I really wanted to understand, how my trauma impacted me and my life, and how the choices basically that I was making. So, first, again, through 15 years, it started out with a lot of assessments. I personality assessment, skills assessments, things like the Enneagram, being able to understand how that plays into who you are, Jungian personality types, understanding how, all the different personality types, both within yourselves and others, and how they factor into who they are, big five. So, how you interact, and are you a leader? Are you a follower? Are you balanced? Are you able to switch back and forth roles, things like that? What are your archetypes? We all have them. So there's tons of different ones, so, what are those archetypes, right? How about your locus of control? Are you, do you feel like you have choices, and that if you really focus, you could achieve your goals if you set your mind to it? Or do you believe that all external factors, are going to impact this, and it will happen or won't happen? So obviously people with an external locus of control tend to feel very out of control of their lives, and tend to most likely put less effort in, because they don't feel like they're actually able to achieve the outcome that they're desiring or expecting, right? So then we also have, motivations. Are people motivated internally, externally? I think, there's a balance probably. A lot of people have a little bit of everything in them, so figuring out those both within ourselves and others, and then disorders and mental health, how does that, and all of those other, factors play into, who you are. And then, again, all of the factors I just talked about, that's all just factors that are known to you, right? What about the Johari window, right? So the Johari window recognizes that, there are things within ourselves or about ourselves, that we know about ourselves, but that others don't know about us. Then there's things about us that others recognize in us that we are unconscious of or don't recognize, right? That can be like some type of shadow or something like that. Then we have things within us that we both recognize. So others can see it, you can see it, and it's like, hopefully it's your gifts, and you can find that sense of purpose, and hopefully that's what you'll find, right? And then you have, what's not known to yourself and what's not known to others, right? And that's where we talk about, the unconscious and the universe, and you know how manifesting and creating, you know, and all of that, because really we don't know, and will we ever know? We'll never know. Right? So that's just the mental, you know, and psychology aspect, you know. Then we had to I considered, you know, how is our body playing into that, you know, specifically, you know, biology and brain development, right? If you watch some of my earlier videos, you know and understand that, which this is totally, was totally shocking to me when I learned this like a year ago, that ages 1 through 3 is most crucial in brain development, right? That first year of a baby's brain development, it is so important that they have that nurturing attentiveness, you know, when they're crying and they're hungry, you know, you're picking them up, singing, interacting with them, because within that first year, their prefrontal cortex is mostly developing during that first year. So although we're looking at a baby and they're being, you know, it's just kind of like a baby laying in its stroller or in its carrier and things like that, it is so crucial in their brain development, especially their front limbic system, again, you know, in their prefrontal cortex, you know. So with these ages 1 through 3 and their brain development, it, you know, is, you know, again, forming, you know. And then we have our brain development, you know, and then again with that, you know, do people have trauma? You know, I know a lot of people have trauma, especially repeated trauma throughout their lives, which create that overactive stress response system that I've talked about again in my earlier videos. So we have that, you know, senses come in through our central nervous system, and we are processing them, you know, in our limbic and our emotional. It's telling us where to go and how to react. So those people with a lot of trauma and overactive stress response systems, you know, they get into this loop where, you know, anybody who's ever heard the term neurons that fire together wire together, right? I talked about it in my earlier videos about like being a pathway, and the more you use those neuron pathways, the more prominent they are and the more likely your neurons are going to go that way, right? So that's why it's very important to recognize, you know, you can do whatever within your psychology and trying to understand things, but there is also the science and the brain development and the neuroscience that's really going to factor in and play a role in that. Besides all of that, you know, when you have this, you know, your senses coming in through your central nervous system and they're going, you know, through your body and your brain and you're processing these, you know, this is also when our physiological system, you know, kicks into gear. So we have, you know, people who are producing, you know, serotonin and dopamine and all of these good feel-good chemicals, right? Or not, if they're not being soothed as a baby. Again, you know, that's why soothing and things like that is so important, because that does help create, you know, their attachment style later in life and how they are going to view and interact with the world, especially at that young infant age, you know, again, between 1 through 3. But again, you know, so we got throughout life, you know, if people are subjected to a lot of neglect and trauma, especially throughout their lives, they had these overactive stress response systems where, especially even, you know, war veterans, I work with a lot of veterans currently, and I'm sure you all can relate when I talk about, the overactive stress response system. You know, when you're on heightened alert, you know, you, one simple trigger, you know, a noise, a smell, a touch, anything, usually sensory, can trigger off, and it can put you straight into that loop where you are automatically reacting. You know, we have to remember that emotions, especially strong, whether good or bad, cement memories in our brain. Those memories are going to form how we are going to view and interact with the world as we grow and get older and throughout life. That's why it's very important to understand that these triggers, when they're coming in and you're feeling them, you know, we got to find a place where people get out of that automatic, impulsive, you know, neuron loop, as we could say. And then lastly, you know, with our brain and body, we also have, you know, our traumatic brain injuries. You know, I know this is common with, I feel like a lot of the veteran people I know, you know, have some, you know, well, trauma as a childhood in general is very, very common. So, you know, whether male or female. And then you have this as a childhood, say you join the military, military sexual trauma is very, very common. As we all know, it can be very, very damaging. So then you have more trauma. And then if it just all of that piles up, and it's very important to be able to recognize that and get ahead of the game. But besides that, then we also have your traumatic brain injury, and that's where, there can be part of your brain that is damaged and harder to create those. Again, the brain is very adaptable, luckily, but it's important to be able to recognize those brain traumas and create and factor that into health and wellness and your own treatment plan specifically. Lastly, we have our whole body, right, and our systems. As with anything, whether it is us, our work group, our family, our communities, our nations, humanity, all of existence, it's systems, right? We have to have balance and good health, positivity and growth, and working together, right? So it's very important as a body, and the brain and the body, and how that affects one another. So definitely physical health can play into negative psychological thoughts and responses, but also the opposite can be true as well. So here we got the, the mind, and then we have our body. And then lastly, we have, what factors played into who I was and how I had grown and who I'd become and who I wanted to become, and I think social interactions, right? We have conditioning, what was conditioned in me that is helpful or harmful? Did my parents' opinions based on their own, which trauma through epigenetics stems very, very long throughout history on both sides of my family. So definitely important to recognize that and know that makes you predisposed to, mental health concerns and other, trauma-related issues in the future, right? So, but you also must understand, what, based on your parents and what they went through, did their opinions and viewpoints and things like that, did they condition you to think or be a certain way? Did you like that way? Is it helpful? Is it harmful? And do you want to be that way? How is my social circles, my jobs, are they supportive and positive? And, do they avoid gossip? I swear, it's one thing I can't handle more than anything, because we really do focus on what we get on. And if we all go around pointing out everybody's flaws, then it's going to be that negative energy. It's just going to feed. It's like a cancer, a virus, right? But the other side is true as well. We can be positive and also spread that, right? But anyway, so we have our as far as social, we have our conditioning, our social circles, their jobs, past experiences, they're going to influence how we're going to decode and any kind of communication, whether through any of our senses in the future, right? So obviously experiences, and then reinforcements, what reinforcements are within our communities, within ourselves, and things like that are helping to influence. And I think all of these are important to consider, especially internally, to have that self-awareness, that we've talked about. That's totally awesome, right? So with that being said, again, working lately here, I think some of my depression is I'm feeling very, very overwhelmed and pulled in a lot of different directions. I still don't have a place to live. My other two jobs are an hour away. I'm getting ready to start my third at the same time, and I'm in school, and that's an hour away. So I've been really, really stressed out, and I've really had to try to gather myself and think about, I've been feeling burned out, let's be real, a little bit. Again, as I mentioned earlier, I've seen a lot of negativity and experienced it in my life. And I've always maintained hope and faith in humanity. And I think a lot of that is due to God, and I'm not preaching or pressuring anything on anybody, but He's always got me through anything and everything. But I think it's important to recognize, when you're struggling. And I had to figure out another way that I could give back. So for me, purpose is very, very important. Again, experiencing a lot of these, traumas in my own history. Again, I'm grateful for all of it, because I feel like God knew I was strong enough, and He knew that through my experiences, I could help a lot of other people through those experiences as well. So again, always grateful for everything that's ever happened to me in my life, or that I may happen for me in my life. But working at several hospitals and being in the trauma field for 15 years now, especially in a crisis role for the hospital, where I respond to trafficking, child abuse, neglect, sexual assault, domestic violences. It's like, not only it's just, I've seen the monsters, I've heard it over and over and over again, and it's gotten to the point where it's kind of exhausting on me a little bit. So I figured this is a great way where I could share and maybe try to take a step back and take on a new role in some other capacity to help and serve others, but also maybe still share what I know about trauma to help others. So hence why I decided to go ahead and make these videos and share, a lot of personal information, about myself. Again, I totally feel like I'm a pardon my French, a total badass anyway. So I don't say anything to get any sympathy or anything. I'm just share my story because I hope that some people can relate. And if they need any kind of advice or assistance, I'm always here to help. I don't need money or anything like that. Like, if you need somebody to talk to, I'm always here, right? So that's why I'm making these videos. Also, here lately, I'm realizing, I really, really, really want to get ahead of the curve, right? So I've experienced, in my own past, a lot of traumas and negativity. And I refuse. I cut off people in situations that don't feel healthy and that are not going to, uplift and bring me up, even if that means being by myself for a little while, which I'm totally cool with until I find my soul tribe, right? But I think it's important to recognize, what do I have control over, and I don't want, when all of these, assaults and things like that I hear about on a constant basis for the past 12 years, 15 years working in this field, to impact how I view the world, right? I'm very, very, very grateful that I feel like I have always maintained that compassion, gentleness. I could be a total badass if I need to, and I think people that know me know that. But 9 times out of 10, if I do that, it is because I'm feeling protective over somebody that is either a minority or vulnerable, or somebody that's not able to take up for themselves. Because again, when you do this internal work and reflection within yourself, you recognize you're good and you're bad. But when you recognize you're bad and you're working on it, it gives you a lot of faith and hope in knowing that people are going to look at you and they're going to point out the negatives and the things you do wrong. And we could all do that. But again, that's going to manifest their own reality. So let's leave them with that. But you got to figure, if anybody is doing that and they're judging your story and your struggle that you're going through, while they're focused on you and not focused on their own stuff and not addressing their own issues, you're focused on you and you're doing everything that you can to do and grow into the best person, not only for yourself, but the loved ones around you, and then your community as well, right? Because not only are you acting in, positive and healthy ways for yourself, but also, then for others as well. So with that being said, I'm going to be working on trying to move forward again with those ants. Sometimes I don't want to be one of those persons, because I think I'm really starting to realize that my thoughts and how I'm thinking things are going to play out creates a mood, and it does create your reality. And I tell you what, I've always maintained this sense of curiosity, understanding, love towards others, hope and faith. Even when I've been made to look like a fool and trusted the wrong people, I still take a lot of solace in knowing that, there are 2 people in this life that I worry about, and that's my mama, who's up in heaven, and God. And I can tell you that they're proud of their daughter. And that doesn't mean I'm perfect, but that means I try and I want to become better, and I am not fearful or shameful to help by helping and share my story if it's maybe going to help others, right? So with that being said, there's this really great doctor and writer, coach, all that stuff, Joe Dispenza, and he talks about your neuron pathways, and being the gatekeeper and how important it is, because what you think, you're going to dictate your future, right? So you got to be thinking, your thoughts, are they true, right? Is this, you know, a projection, a reflection? Can you come up with actual evidence to back it up? And number two, are they helpful, right? If they're not helpful, why engage with it? Why would we engage with anybody, whether it be our own thoughts, a partner, or anybody else that doesn't want to be helpful and give and love and come from a place of sharing, right? And that goes not just others, but also ourselves, right? And showing ourselves grace. He also says, life isn't what's outside. It's what's inside that you let out, right? So I know one thing, I spent a lot of my years letting my trauma dictate, you know, especially in the relationship department, you know, what I was going to expect to be an outcome in the future. And I'm not going to do that anymore, because you know what? I had two parents who overcame all their struggles and were totally freaking amazing, affectionate, in love, thriving financially, mentally, emotionally, in every sense. And I know that I can have that too. And I'm going to believe not just in that, but I'm going to believe in me following my own path and that leading to abundance. And I do believe that that abundance is going to lead to places where I'm going to be able to help and serve that many more people. So, like a Zen ninja warrior princess, I'm going to get control of my ends, get control of my thoughts. If it's not positive and it's not helpful, chop, chop. I'm cutting it out. And I think you can do the same. It's not easy. Again, you know, it's a lot easier to notice stuff in others, but when we're addressing ourselves, it's a lot harder to recognize. But with a lot of time and effort, you can do it. So if you want just a really quick exercise, I want you to grab just a little scrap piece of paper and a pen, and pause this video for a few seconds while you grab that. And then when you come back, I want you to start this video again. And then I want you to close your eyes and I want you to listen to the following 3 statements. And at the end of each statement, I want you to very quickly, without just as quick, the first thing that comes to mind, write down the word that you would end this sentence with. Okay, ready? First, I am blank. Next, people are blank. And then lastly, the world is blank. Now, what I want you to do, you know, again, if you're a practitioner or a parent or anything else, you could tell a lot by a person, especially a child, by how they answer these questions, right? It gives you a lot of insight into their reality, how they decode and, you know, engage with and how they feel about the world around them, how their perception and outlook is going to be, and things like that. It's a great starting point. You know, if it's negative, that probably says, you know, you probably want to work on something like that, you know. So with that being said, God bless everybody. I hope you all have a great weekend and stay blessed.